Welcome, everybody. We are about ready to start one of the last sessions of the day. We have one more track after this, but you are here attending a CNA, the NVD, and a CVE consumer walk into a bar. Hilarity ensues. So I've got a series of questions I'm going to ask our panel of experts. We'll do a real quick round of introductions, and midway through the presentation, we will fob out for audience questions, but I think I've got about 12 questions in queue if you're all shy, which you haven't been this week. So I expect we'll have a lively audience engagement here shortly and make Val run around. Oh yeah, I see Windsor's already got his. All right. So briefly, we're going to do some introductions. We've got some questions, and ideally we'll provide some answers. So let me talk and let's have our CNA persona, Madison, just give a brief introduction.
Hi, everybody. My name is Madison Oliver. I run the open source CNA at GitHub. I previously worked under our product CNA and also worked under the CERT coordination CNA and have been involved with CVE for years and currently sit on the CVE board as well. So I am here representing the CNA in this scenario.
Thank you. Next up, we have the NVD, Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya Brewer. I work for NIST. I've been at NIST an embarrassingly long time. Yes, I really am that old. And I've worked on all kinds of things for NIST. I've worked on smart grid, identity management, spam emails, God help me. Just, a number of things. And for the last 4.5 years, I've been the program manager for the NVD.
Awesome. Thank you. And our last expert persona is my friend Andrew, who's our CVE consumer. You want to introduce yourself and talk a bit, pass the mic down. Talk a little about your perspective.
G'day, I'm Andrew. I'm from Google's open source security team, working on a thing called OSV that we make, OSV.dev. I'm the token Australian. I've been at Google for a while in a bunch of different roles, but only on the open source security side of things for coming up on 2 years.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, let's jump right into it. We have some softball questions. We have some spicy things in the mix here. But first off, I want to ask our experts, and whoever's interested to start us off, please jump in. But broadly, could you explain what the purpose of a vulnerability identifier is and talk about what problem that vuln identifier is trying to solve?
Well, from my perspective, a vulnerability identifier is something that identifies a vulnerability. The purpose that it's trying to solve or the problem that it's trying to solve is to ensure that you and I are talking about the same thing. So if I say there's a vulnerability in this, how do I know that it's the same thing that you're talking about, right? If you say there's a vulnerability in this project, in this web page, how do we ensure that we're talking about the exact same thing, that it's not a duplication, that we're actually trying to fix the same issue? So for me, it comes to a matter of definition. I view it much more like a dictionary, and truly, in my opinion, nothing more than that. It's just an identifier that allows us to then be able to talk about the thing itself.
And that's pretty much the exact same opinion we have at NIST. When we got into this business, there would be a vulnerability announced, and one company would call it pistachio ice cream, and another company would call it walrus, and another company would say, well, it's red apple, don't you know? And people on the end would have to stop and go, are we talking about the same thing in 3 different spaces with 3 different names? And it took a lot of time and effort to suss out these things. And, so we were some of the ones that helped say, no, we've got to have a way to talk about the same thing.
As a consumer, Andrew, how useful is it to have kind of a unified, consistent vuln identifier?
Yeah, so we're a little bit different in that the identifier space is also federated out, as well as the all the data. So for us, CVE IDs in particular are like a de facto identifier that everybody speaks. Each ecosystem in OSV has its own prefix and unique identifier. And we have the ability to alias things. So when we're talking about the same thing, we have pointers to the other identifiers in other ecosystem namespaces that are considered to be the same thing. So I mean, where we look at it, it's basically just a primary key.
Great. Thank you all. Moving on, could you maybe describe a little bit what it's like managing these 3 globally used resources, GitHub, NVD, and OSV? And how do you feel about being viewed in certain communities as being the system of record?
I would say it's certainly very difficult doing this, especially at the scale that we're talking about in vulnerability data as a whole, but especially the vulnerability data that we're producing here at GitHub, especially as the CNA for many open source developers on GitHub. I personally, of course, enjoy being viewed as maybe the system of record, but again, right, I am but a conveyor of information. I am not necessarily, and very, very rarely, the sole producer of it. I'm getting that information from other places, namely, typically, the code owner, the maintainer of the repository, the person closest to the production of the code itself. But I also pull information from folks like the NVD, folks like security groups in each different ecosystem, in each different registry. So we are pulling from, consolidating, and pulling out the salient points of all of this information to share it with our users. But very, very rarely am I the primary source or the originator of a lot of this information, which can cause some friction and some confusion, especially when there might be something wrong with the data, something confusing in the data. So when I am viewed as the primary source, when I don't view that as my role in this necessarily, it can cause a lot of that confusion and difference in expectations, which I would say adds a lot of friction.
I can pile on from where we sit. We're also an aggregator, a little bit like the NVD sort of is a distribution point of information. And we have the beginnings of the phenomenon that I call "don't shoot the messenger," where we're perceived as the originator of the data that we're exposing. And so we get feedback on that data. And we're not a large team, but there's no value add us being a human middleware between a downstream consumer and the true source of the data. So I'm interested in sort of signposting and sort of smoothing out that user journey around getting feedback on the data to the true source of it, to avoid that shooting the messenger, man in the middle sort of situation.
So we are very often called the source of data, the authoritative source of data. A lot like these guys, we aggregate a good bit of data. Now, we are the originator for some data in some cases, particularly something like CPE records. But, we have to stop and caution people a little bit. It's like, if a CNA turns in data, then, it's their product. They are the authoritative source. Now, there may be some miscommunications happening between them and us, meaning there's, a little bit of things not matching, but really it's the makers of the products that we view as the authoritative source. We are, originators for a little bit of stuff, but largely we're an aggregator.
Awesome. Thank you for your perspectives. Moving along, can you maybe just give us kind of a peek behind the curtains? What goes on in managing all of this public data? And we have noted many times how there's been a very consistent 20% plus increase over the last several years of vulnerabilities. So kind of maybe you could just give us some insight in how you might be trying to react to this increase and manage that.
The way that we manage this from our CNA perspective is by taking it to the source as much as reasonably and humanly possible. So we assign CVEs for our open source maintainers that we view as the code owner. They are as close as we can reasonably get to the producers of the code, of the software that is being maintained and deployed. So we get our information from them, right? We view them as the primary source, the source of truth, and we rely on them for a lot of that. We have been adapting to the great increase in reports by deliberately being very scoped. We have a very narrow scope and very deliberately so. We are focused on open source software, open source packages. We are not trying to boil the ocean. I have a lot of respect and empathy for those that are, but the way that we've been managing this is by being very narrow and very deliberately so.
Would you say that you were trying to shift left?
Yes.
Andrew or Tanya, any thoughts?
Well, we're not managing much we don't originate very much at all. Like the only data that we originate is the stuff that we've enumerated as part of our ingestion. So that just becomes a data storage problem. And we got that from what we deem to be authoritative sources. So yeah, it's just a ingestion side problem.
But so for ingestion, have you recognized the increase over the last few years? And is there any given you any opportunities to improve?
So we only started converting and ingesting CVE data from 2016 onwards as of late last year. So that was an initial giant import. And it's a bit early to sort of talk about growth from that point forward. Like we've certainly been impacted, like plenty of other people have been, of the aforementioned NVD analysis slowdowns, because that affects how we determine what's even in scope for conversion. So right now, I'd say 2024 is looking quieter than 2023 as a result of that, because we've got less records converting at the minute.
So we have the lovely job of managing data that goes all the way back.
Yeah.
We have data that is about products that nobody has seen in 15 years. When you have, if you include from when ICAT started, we're over 20 years.
Wow.
We're coming up on 25, just under the name of NVD next year. I plan on holding a party. It will be paid for by my own private money because government is not allowed to hold parties. So managing all of this public data, one of the best things I think we did was start the CV map program, because it offers more of an opportunity for CNAs to come talk to us about their data and help us understand each other about why are you coming up with a 4.5 and why are we coming up with an 8.2. It hasn't necessarily forced a lot of conversations, but it has given rise to a lot of opportunities for conversations that, helps better the quality of the data overall. Managing the volume of what we do has been a little crazy making. When you deal with something like the CVE dictionary, which has over 800,000 entries, when you deal with CVEs that have grown 20% or more year on year end for, many years at this point, most people do not realize about April of 2020, the volume of email coming to the NVD and the CVE dictionary tripled. My analysis staff who answers those emails did not change, but we are dealing now with triple the amount. And we thought for a little while maybe it's just because, everybody's trying to work themselves to not focus on things. And maybe that's just, a temporary increase. Nope. Nope. 4 years later, we are still at triple the amount of email, if not more, than we had before the pandemic.
Wow. All right. Got my first spicy question. Hot take. In your humble opinions, whose database is better?
It depends. And it depends on a lot of things, right? My GitHub advisory database is hyper-focused very specifically on vulnerabilities and open source packages. If that is the sort of thing that you care about, I would argue that I have the best data that we could possibly have about that. If that is not what you care about, and that is not what you're worried about, and that is not in your threat or risk landscape, then that information would obviously not be very useful to you. So I would encourage you to think about, what am I using? What do I care about? Why do I care about it? And keep that context when you are looking for vulnerability data sources, because you want to make sure that you're getting the information that is actually relevant and pertinent to you. And open source, I would love for folks to make use of our database. It's free, it's open. I'm very passionate about that. Please use it. You are more than welcome to. We are very open to feedback. If you get information from elsewhere, that's also perfectly fine. What is important to me is that you're getting the information that you need, whether it be from me or others.
I believe before we move on, you said some magic words. How did you start that answer off?
It depends.
After you are ready, you can maybe the two of you think about your perspective. Who do you think has the best database?
Yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to tell you is right now, the NVD is not the best database. If the NVD was the best database, I would not be putting together a consortium and asking industry to help me make it better. It would already be better. There's a lot of room for the NVD to improve. And I think we have the capability to be a much better database than we are right this minute.
I'm going to pile on to what Madison said. It's about use cases and scopes and stuff like that. So like the GitHub advisory database, OSV.dev is scoped to open source. And the extra bit that I want to pile on to what Madison said is how you want to use it as well, right? So our primary use case is to enable remediation, scanning and driving remediation. So that's sort of the way our APIs are sort of pitched. And so that, if that meets your needs, great, use it. I don't like, this is where I insert my standard spiel about tyrannies of or. Go with the genius of and, right? And
Very nice.
Use what works.
Excellent. Thank you all for sharing your perspectives. A problem that I've heard mentioned in the halls of VolunCon and in our assorted sessions is as an ecosystem, we have some opportunities around data quality. So thinking about that from your unique perspectives, what are you doing or what do you plan on doing to help kind of address some of these data quality issues going forward?
Pick me. I come to conferences like this and I have this hobby horse and I ride around on it the whole week. No, but seriously, I wanted to socialize the problem here and I talked to the right people and offer concrete, actionable suggestions and go from there. Put a face to a whinger in my case and say, hi, I'm the guy whinging about it. But not just complain, but offer concrete suggestions. And then on our side as a database side, the only way you can deal with the scale of this is to do it programmatically. So provide machine readable feedback, filter it on the way in, go from there.
So to build on top of what Andrew said, I'd say the approach that we take is we put humans in the loop. In addition to much of the automation that we have, with my goal of being to focus the humans that I have on the things that actually require human review, we still very much have humans in the loop. The advisories that we're publishing and the CVEs that we're assigning, we know have downstream effect. We know that this causes work for folks. So we have a team of human beings that review every single thing that we send out. And on top of that, I also acknowledge that humans are fallible, right? We're humans. We make mistakes sometimes, and we should also allow for that in our processes. So in GitHub Nature, we are very open source, run a repo where we take feedback from the community all of the time. So if you see something that we've produced that is missing, possibly incorrect, we are very open to feedback. PR is welcome. Please open one.
Well, in our case, we invented data format. We have come up with something called the ontology, which is the vulnerability ontology, and you smash those together for vulntology. Jake Asley hates the name, but we want to try and help better the data quality by showing folks a data format that has a core set of data points that if you give us that core set of data points, you've gone a long ways towards having a much and CVE that is much easier to analyze downstream. And if you use some of the peripheral data points as well, even better.
Excellent. Moving on to our next question, and we touched on it just a little bit. Tanya mentioned that NVD has data that goes back decades. So time is only progressing. What challenges have you seen up to this point managing that data longevity? And how do we intend to, what are we doing to plan to help support vulnerability information for decades going forward? The data set isn't getting smaller.
Data longevity ends up being very difficult in relation to freshness, especially. How do we ensure that the information is accurate for long periods of time, that we don't write something that is so narrow that it could immediately be not true tomorrow? So we're very careful about the phrasing that we use, the mappings that we do, the information that we're providing, with the interest and the expectation that this will be accurate for as long as it reasonably can be so. Scale and quantity is also a huge factor when it comes to this. Supporting this information for decades is certainly a challenge, especially in terms of storage and in terms of size for some of the vulnerability formats that we have been working on as well. Some of the ways that we've been tackling this as a community and at GitHub and elsewhere is by federating, by asking the community to help us with this as well. Help us keep this information accurate for longer, right? The data longevity. If it is out there, something were to happen to us, right? The NVD, others, somebody else still has that information because it's been made public. So if one goes down because it is federated, because it is shared, because it is open, it is not lost maybe only with us.
How old is the GitHub advisory database, Madison? How many years?
How old is the GitHub advisory database? 2019?
Yeah, okay. So we're even younger, right? So the oldest data that we've got in OSV.dev is the CVE data that we've converted from 2016 onwards, right? So yeah, it's not that old yet thing. But my personal opinion on this problem is to have a graceful degrade sort of story. So there was some really good data analysis that was presented on Monday afternoon about sort of the long tail of how long a vulnerability's got a lot of legs for in the wild. And I think bearing that in mind, having a graceful degrade story, given that a record becomes diminishingly useful to the masses the older it gets, means that you just have to accept things like link rot are inevitable, and focus on the fresh stuff for the majority of people over a shorter time horizon than decades.
So I'm both the old lady of the panel and NVD is the old database. One of the things I want to deal with in the next couple of years, we have some really old data that, we run into wonderful and exciting things like links to security advisories that were put in place by companies that have been bought 10 years ago and no longer exist. And now someone has bought that website and that link now leads to somewhere government sites should not link to. We've dealt with this many times. We have records that need to degrade gracefully, and we don't have a good system of doing that yet. And what I hope to do is, by meeting with more of the community, find out, what would the community find acceptable? How would the community like for us to deal with this data? Because we have data that, it's for products that haven't been seen in 15 years. The company no longer exists. The company got bought, then that got bought, then that got bought. There's just no doing anything with some of this data. And we need a graceful degradation process.
I have several more awesome canned questions, but I think this might be a nice place to pivot and ask the audience or my friends on the interwebs if they would like to ask these esteemed experts what's on their mind as we have this awesome little conversation in the bar.
Hi, I have a question for Tanya. You mentioned you saw a rate of like 3 times increase in vulnerabilities since past 4 years. Did you do any root cause analysis for the reason of it? Are the companies suddenly like waking up to support the, the security posture, or is it the fear of getting into any legal actions?
So we didn't see 3 times the vulnerabilities coming in. We saw 3 times the email coming in. So emails about why did we score a 4.5 and you scored an 8.2? Hey, you're missing data on this, that, and the other. Oh, by the way, you have typos in these 115 CPEs. We get those really frequently. We'll get people that like they're individual researchers and they'll just go, oh, by the way, you have typos in these 250 CPEs. You should go fix those. We get a ton of email and it's about all kinds of things. And that's what we saw 3 times of in 2020. And really, we just trained more people we cross-trained more people how to answer email. We just kind of spread the pain across the team a little more. And we, dedicated more time to answering emails. And unfortunately, it was to the detriment of our modified CVE queue. Our modified CVE queue has, gone to a crawl because we're answering 3 times the email.
Can you just repeat her question real quick?
Yeah, her question was, did we do any root cause analysis for why we got 3 times the email? Honestly, we didn't have the resources to do that kind of analysis. We were so busy scrambling to keep up with, the growing number of new CVEs and then suddenly 3 times the email. We're a really limited team. At our largest, the CVE team has been 21 people. The NVD team, not the CVE team, sorry. The NVD team has never been over 21 people, ever.
So I was curious to get your thoughts on software identification as a not totally solved problem. So say you're, for example, vendoring a lot of unmanaged C and C++ libraries. And you basically need to identify them all so that you can know when new CVs come out that affect them. It seems like there's this sort of chicken and egg problem with CPEs where they aren't issued until a CVE is issued. So even if you have developers, even if you have some mechanism for developers to tag what package and version one of these vendor libraries is, there's no way to know whether when the CVE is issued, it will actually appear in the CPE dictionary or not, which makes actually scanning a lot of vendor libraries more or less impossible to do with high confidence in the fact that you're getting like good coverage. So there's obviously like other namespaces like ecosystems kind of have their own namespace, but CVE seems like the only option as a sort of namespace for unmanaged libraries. I was curious to get your thoughts on that.
So I'm going to assume this is my question. One of my short-term goals with the consortium I'm standing up is to build a system that will let manufacturers and CNAs give us just big dumps of CPE data and not have to wait for CVE to be created first. We want to solve that problem by just going ahead and saying, okay, I'm going to call out Pete Aller. Pete Aller has said to me in a meeting, can I just give you 74,000 CPEs? And the answer was, oh, please don't. But in a year's time, I want the answer to be, yes, please, we'll take those 74,000 CPEs, thanks. And we want to grow the dictionary independently of CVEs being written.
Any other thoughts on software identifiers?
We're trying to branch out to have other software identifiers put into our database as well, to be decided.
What OSV as a record schema does is what we call an ecosystem specific identifier, or ESI, where it's a combination of the ecosystem name and then a package name within that ecosystem. This doesn't address the C and C++ problem because there is no ecosystem, like a holistic ecosystem. But for all the other ones that do, the assumption is that the package name exists from time zero, and then your ESI therefore is valid from the same time.
I have a question from online. Was the sudden volume increase in April 2020 due to COVID-19 or something else?
Unfortunately, I can't tell you that answer. We're not really tooled to do analysis of why are suddenly everybody sending us emails. There was no obvious reason. At first we thought, well, maybe it's just because everybody's, burying themselves in their work and trying to just get by. And that didn't play out to be the answer. And we've never had the resources to go figure out, what the other answer is.
Okay. I have another question from online, and I'm going to mispronounce the word, but what or where is the community around vulnerability?
So we're in the process of building that community. We have a small prototype in GitHub that we are starting to hand out the address of so that people can see what direction we're thinking and give us feedback and let us know, hey, I found a bug. Wait, it doesn't have this feature. Why does it not have this feature? To start giving us feedback. And we want that to, as we further develop tools and get test data generated and whatnot, we're hoping to create a Vulntology community. Unfortunately, we've been talking about Vulntology for a stupidly long amount of time. And it is one of those projects that we needed more resources on. And so finally, last year, I kind of beat up Chris Turner and said, all right, you got to do something. either we're doing something with it or we're not doing something with it. And he was like, no, we're going to do something with it. So in the last year, we've done a lot with it. We've actually gotten a prototype put together. So, we want to build that community.
I wonder if we'll see a star count explosion on the repo after its big reveal today.
I'll keep an eye on that.
All right, so there is a decent amount of discussions going on in the Discord channel. I do have another question. This one's for Tanya. Has NVD considered opening CPE so that NVD is not the sole key holder? For example, the ability for people to submit CPE strings for products that do not yet appear in CVE and NVD.
So that's pretty much the same answer I gave the young man in the front row. Yes, we are looking to have a process, to have a tool, so that if you want to dump however many CPEs into the dictionary, it's a fairly simple task to do when we get everything up and running, not yet. We want to open the dictionary more to the people who frankly know their products and their versions better than we do.
Any questions in the room? Otherwise, I can keep reading the ones online. Got one right here.
I'd rather take questions than my questions.
It's okay. This one's for GitHub. I really like the GitHub Security Advisory Database. It's awesome. My question for you is, how do you have such good data? But more specifically, does it originate from maintainers? Do you have really careful human checks? What do the humans check? What's your process like? And also, is it publicly documented where I could read about it?
That is a fantastic question. We handle a lot of that with a team of wonderful human beings who happen to actually all be here in the flesh in the back. I run a team of wonderful folks who curate all of the data in our reviewed set of the database. So they are security analysts, security minded. So they are keeping that, right? That's their focus. That's what they're doing when they're reviewing data. We are pulling data from a number of different sources, NVD, at others, trusted sources in the ecosystems that we're working in and within our scope that we're working in. We also, when needed, especially, right, we'll also engage with those communities directly. We have very close ties to all of the communities that we support. We're very open, very happy to work with them. They're very happy to work with us as well. My team will review incoming data from the CVE feed and others, review all of that, curate it into a single data point, into a single CVE and or advisory, publish that. So we aim to have a very high quality bar. It's very human focused. In early 2022 is when we really opened up our database to public feedback. That has been such a tremendous positive force for us as well, because it's allowed us to rely on experts in the community as well. We do not claim to be experts in everything. We could not possibly be, but we have a platform and a voice and a service that we provide that has that implication. So if I can pull from the community and really pull from those experts when I need them, which also isn't all the time, right? But if I can pull from them when I need them, or they can come to us when they need us, it creates such a sense of collaboration. It's so open. It is so much better, in my opinion. It's been such a positive force for us. So that repo and all of those conversations on each and every single advisory is all public. And don't get me wrong, we say no to quite a lot of things too. Folks will suggest, this is wrong. I think it's actually this version. I think it's actually this package. You know what? I think this is actually this. This isn't real. This CVSS is too high. And we have those conversations with those folks very openly and very deliberately so. And we'll say, well, this is what we think. This is what our analysis show. This is what our security researchers show. And this is the information we have and why we believe this and why we're not accepting that. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, they're like, you know what, that I agree. I hadn't thought of it that way. I didn't know that information existed. You know what? I agree with you. So it's created this wonderful feedback cycle with the community too, where we've gotten to, I think, a really good position where we're We're also able to say no, but explain why. We're also able to say, yes, yes, we didn't have that information. We missed it for this reason or another. We take that back, review it. Why didn't we have this? Why did we miss it? Fix our process, fix our system, like little increments, little positive things, every day, every week, every month. And we're every day getting better and better at this, curating a better and better data set.
Cheers to the GitHub advisory database.
Yeah.
I love my team, if you can't tell.
Okay, I got another one online. Organizations behind CNA, NVD, and CVE are US government supported or agencies, but vulnerabilities, products, and hackers don't have borders. How challenging, if at all, is that to bring those two facts together?
I think that ends up being extremely challenging. It's not lost on me that a lot of vulnerability data and key stakeholders in vulnerability management and vulnerability data are very US-centric, and even within that, very East Coast US-centric. Happens to work for me. I happen to be East Coast in the US, but I fully recognize that that does not work for everybody. So something that I'm personally doing is forging these strong bonds with folks that might not be able to have a voice in these communities for that reason, which is actually what led to me and Andrew working together quite a lot.
Yeah, I can say as someone that lives on the east coast of Australia, the fact that the mind share center of gravity is in the US East Coast time zone bites. All of the CVE program working group meetings are at like 6 a.m. my time. No, the NVD folks, we have some informal regular chats with the NVD, which is lovely. But yeah, the 6 a.m. 3 days a week for various working group meetings is not sustainable for me to show up at. So,
All right, CRob, do you got another question in your list?
Yeah. I got 1,000 of them. And if it's not on the slide, I'll just make it up. Like, if you were a tree, what kind of tree would you be?
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely. You could ask a question.
Madison, what's the analysis, the biggest analysis pain point for your analysts? If you have one that you know of. Sorry to put you on the spot, just popped in my head.
I think one of the hardest things that my team has to overcome is bad data from the start. We're only as good as the information that we have available, the information that is given to us by any of our trusted sources, the maintainers on our platform, elsewhere, wherever we're pulling this data from. It's only as good as what we have available. My team does everything that they can to ensure that this is the best that is available, but that has a ceiling to it. We can only work with what we have. So I guess as a call to action to anybody producing vulnerability information, the first time it's out, especially make sure it's as good as it possibly can be. Include all of the salient points. It can be very hard to fix those things retroactively, especially if you get something maybe incorrect in initial disclosure. It's really hard to come back from that. Once misinformation is out there, it is so pervasive. So ensuring that it's correct from the start, high quality from the start, ensures that everything then downstream is at least that high.
Thank you. My next official question, as the audience brews up their thoughts and the internet Googles around and finds some questions to ask. Now, we live in an ever-changing dynamic world where we have some systems of record, some authoritative data. How do you react as related vulnerability standards emerge? We are going through a transition period today of CVSS 3.1 to 4. We've had a lot of talks here about EPSS and KEV and SSVC. So how do your particular infrastructure and systems monitor and then react to these updated standards?
So since we at GitHub end up being very community focused, very open, very engaging, we try to engage in those standards at any point that we can. We keep an eye on things that are up and coming, that are changing. We will internally do extensive reviews of what's changing, why is it changing, what is the impact that this will have on our users, especially in an open source and package context. We've spent countless hours reviewing the changes from 3.1 to 4.0 in CVSS, same with CVE services, EPSS, you name it. We review them, we make decisions on them, we do what we can with the constraints that we have, because keeping in mind, upgrading to a new schema, adding a new data field, That's all also engineering time, which is also unfortunately not my team. So I end up making a lot of demands and requests from other teams, from other services, pulling resources from them. So I have to balance how helpful will this change or this addition be to my users and my community versus the cost of this change, of adding it. And I look at it from of course, right, a security mindset. Does this make them more secure? Is this better for them? If not, maybe we can wait. If yes, I push heavily to do it now.
For the OSV schema, it is an open source project that lives under the OpenSSF's auspices. And the general evolution of it is to keep it simple, keep it scoped, and to avoid backwards incompatible changes. So, and it's relatively young, so it hasn't sort of had to deal with too much churn to date. The systems themselves, we're using a NoSQL databases on the back end, so it's been fairly flexible to just sort of roll with the schema changes. But it's work. Like anytime we make a change, it's work.
So at what point would you consider adding in some type of new measurement, like EPSS, for example?
I'm told by Oliver, who's the one with more of the institutional knowledge around the evolution of the schema, that like we're not a big fan of severity scores for the same reasons that the Go programming language sort of articulates really nicely, that it's really difficult to have one globally relevant score for all consumptions, right? So I believe we held off adding severity scores for a while. And we haven't got EPSS in there yet, but I think that's an interesting one to add.
All right, we got one more question we'll try to hit up before we do this. Oh, do you want to add a comment?
Just really quickly, we do similar things that GitHub did and does. We engage in a lot of the standards development. We've been involved with SWIDs, CVSS4. We were involved with CVSS3 and 3.1. We were involved with CVE, JSON 5. Standards is kind of what we do. So we do that.
So we have 3 different databases, different use cases. Each one of you are trying to serve customers slightly different because you've got different end users that you're trying to, GitHub, for example, core is trying to solve the Dependabot problem, right? But then also it's being used by other people. OSV is a very big Google sort of trying to focus on the Google problem, but then also for customers. NVD is just everybody. I know that NVD is engaging in attempting to democratize the conversation around what this structure is going to be. I don't know about the OSV governance and the GitHub governance. Would a governance and democratization of the conversation around what these databases need to be help guide and enable us all who are actual users of these databases to turn them and make them what we most need them to be? And how could that conversation start so that the organizations that are running these things are not just echo chambering themselves, but are also including other conversations and people in those discussions?
I'm going to take a wild guess that my answer might be very similar to Andrew's, and I'm going to say open an issue. Start a discussion. We do a lot very openly, and I'm happy to have a discussion. We do so across the OSV repo, across ours all the time. I'm happy to have those conversations in public. I'm happy to have them in private too. I'm engaged in many working groups across many different organizations, and I wear many hats. So in my personal mission is to make myself available, right? I want to have these conversations. I want this feedback. I want you to tell me, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to tell me so that we can do that. I've seen the federation that the CVE program has had, and I think that has had a ton of success. I think that's a great model, and a future like that is something that interests me greatly.
Yeah, what Madison said, all of the OSV stuff is first order open source, have a discussion via an issue, via a pull request. That's, yeah, it's open source in nature.
And one more thing to add to that too, and I think commonly for all of us really that are involved in this in vulnerability management, this is it ends up being very mission focused and especially very volunteer oriented. And a lot of us are genuinely just trying to do our best, right? We're just trying to help solve this problem that we all have. So even if you start reaching out to folks in the industry, you start reaching out to big stakeholders, there's a really good chance that even if they aren't the right folks for you to be talking to about that particular problem, they might know who will be and might be willing to make that kind of connection. So even if I'm not it, right? If GitHub isn't the answer, if the CVE board isn't the answer, I might know folks who are working on that, or somebody else might know folks who are working on that. And especially if it's open in the public, and if I can tag them in it, like I'd be happy to make those connections and point folks to the right direction, even if the answer isn't me.
Ready to wrap up?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just want to can everybody give a nice warm of applause for this awesome panel?
Thank you, friends. Excellent talk.